Welcome to a very special episode here in the Celtic Exchange, where I'm joined once again by Celtic author Matt Corr, who's here to tell us about his latest book, Celtic in the 30s. Matt, welcome back to the show. How did you decide upon this era in Celtic for your latest project?
Thanks, Tino. It's lovely to be back. I guess part accident, part design for this one. It's the 30s, quite an incredible decade. It's always felt pretty special. I'm going all the way back to, I guess, my childhood. You might, of course, you're too young to remember, but Celtic listeners will maybe remember the Holy Ground, the Glasgow Celtic album from the sort of mid-60s, and one of the songs in that, mainly anthems, but one of the songs on that was John Thompson song, and I guess it's a wee boy, that whole story of, it's Celtic theatre, isn't it? It's a Celtic, the young tragic goalkeeper killed of all places at Ibrox, saving the goal, and giving his life. So you've got John Thompson and all that sadness on one side, then you've got things like the great McGrory, just wonderful Celtic, and so many others. It's a real cast of all time Celtic greats. So and all that against I guess the context of from the Great Depression through all the things that were happening in continental Europe, which eventually would end up in another horrific world war. So 20 years after they vowed they would never go there again. So it's always fascinated me, and so that I guess that was the plan thing. At some point I would do that. The accidental part maybe came in. I had a pal, Paddy, when we back in the things like the Road to Seville. Paddy and I were drinking Mulgai at that time, and we were in places like Blackburn and Vigo, just when their stories in itself. But anyway, long story short, Paddy had this autograph photo, a couple of autograph photos, and it had been in the family forever. Didn't really know the context. Sent it to me, said, what can you tell me? And you start digging into these things. So some of the names were obvious, like McGrory and whatever. Others less so. But so start narrowing it down. Me, spreadsheets, and starting to say, well, he started then, played then. You get wee blocks. You're narrowing it down. But we still couldn't really work out, why it appeared in Inverness or something like that, up in the Highlands or whatever. So I started looking at that, uncovering stories of maybe lesser known Celts. A number of guys that some I'd heard of, some I hadn't, but great stories when you start digging. Started doing some articles for the Celtic Star, published them, got some nice feedback, and before you know it, you've been here before me, Tino, haven't you? Before you know it, a couple of articles or an idea or whatever has become 20, 30, 40,000 words. So I think at that point I'm beginning to think, there's a story here, not just about I guess the great and the good, but also about all the other players that sort of passed through Celtic Park, over that decade, and I guess from there. So maybe February 22, maybe 2 years ago, I just decided to get clear of the Harry Hood book. We'd got the Harry book out, and I thought, as the next project, done a lot of work here already, which I can, I can use, I can base it on, I can, lean on. And then we went on holiday, believe it or not. Leslie and I went on holiday, and I did say in advance, I came clean. I just said, look, one of the things rather than lying at the pool here, what I'll be doing is I'll be sort of laying out a structure and what this might look at, and that's what I did. We went on holiday for a week.
An old romantic man.
Who says romance is dead? Celtic's concerned, but as I say, I was up front. I said, look, I'm going to bring my stuff with me, but rather than reading the books, I'm probably going to sit and gather, because obviously you don't have the same level of distractions there. So that's exactly what I did. Started laying it out, and so that started, as I say, way back to almost 3 years ago now. And then I probably aimed to finish it before now. And then, as it always happens here, one of the things that was missing was additional input from the families, the families of the players, families of people's fathers and grandfathers that could recall that time and give that personal. You want it to be personal. You want it to be human. And that in itself, that sort of final part of the process, if you like, took over a year. I think I remember this time last October speaking to Barry Divers, grandson of John for the 30s and son of John for the 60s, if you like. So that was October, and right up to a few months ago. So in the meantime, obviously there's other ideas, projects coming in. So a couple of times we've said, look, let's put a hold on that just now and get David Potter, God rest him, get David's book out and Matthew Marr's book out. Mm-hmm. But I thought, I need to do this, I need to get it finished. So and holiday in the summer, I thought, right, this is it, we're getting this out, get it out in time for Christmas, and also get it out in time to just put a wee line in the sand for terms of my writing, mm-hmm. and take a step back. So
just on that,
long answer to a short question.
You're no novice now in the Celtic writing game. You're a number of books in. This is over 2 volumes, this book, Celtic in the 30s, Volume 1 and Volume 2. How many books in are you, Matt? What can you remind me?
So solo books. This will take me to 5. So five solo books and 1 collaboration. A collaboration with Liam Kelly and David Potter. So I 5 solo books and a collaboration 5 years, and also a further. So that's 6. A further 4 which I've edited and co-published in that time. So 10 Celtic books in 5 years. So
busy man.
Maybe time to step back a wee bit.
You mentioned some of the families, relation to John Divers, for example.
Yes.
Does the research of these volumes, I've read that there was so much going on at Celtic in the 30s that, that such is the reason that you had to do it over 2 volumes. But did you come into contact with a lot of the family? How easy is it to track family down? Are they all, I presume, fairly happy to speak? And I suppose ultimately, is there a real pride within these families that one of their family members pulled on the hoops?
Yeah, very much so in every case. I mean, I guess at some point you might be someone who's maybe less keen to speak. But everyone, it was a combination of people knowing what you were doing. We sort of put an SOS out there saying, maybe about a year and a half ago, saying we're doing this. If your family member was involved, by all means get in contact. So we got a few through that route, other through friends of a friend. Pat Woods, for example, knew Frank Murphy's daughter. So so a few weeks ago, out sort of Bearsden, I'm talking to Frank's 2 daughters and his grandson, and they give you a completely different insight, which is wonderful stuff. And just that word you mentioned, pride overriding thing. We were taking a photo before we left there, and they kept saying to me, "We're so proud you're doing this for our dad." And I'm thinking, this guy is a Celtic great, so I feel privileged to be doing the work. So it's nice when you get that. So Bobby Hogg's son, a couple of times out to his house, and Bobby's coming out saying, "Oh, this is in a box." And then he'll open, what sounds like an old TV programme, he'll open the box and he's pulling out medals and invitations for 1930s jerseys that his dad, earned for Scotland in the 30s. I wasn't sure what to do with this. I'm saying, well, you know what I'm doing? I'm taking a photo of this and I'm going to talk about this. So yeah, huge pride in every one of the family members that we spoke to. So, and that's a big part for me, because that's the bit where you get to give something back. So these folk are giving you their time and they're sharing their thoughts, their private sentiments, and then you're putting that story out there. So another generation of Celtic readers will get to know about Frank Murphy and John Divers and Malcolm MacDonald, Bobby Hogg, Peter Scarf.
I was going to say, I recognise some of those names. Malcolm MacDonald, for example, Frank Murphy and Bobby Hogg, new to me. For example, as well, and I dare say new to a whole generation of readers as well. But that's the whole point, isn't it, Matt? It just brings these stories back to life, and fascinating stories and successful times at Celtic and all the ups and downs that come with Celtic over the years. Yeah. But it's true recognition for, I think, using your own words, folk who lived the dream. Yeah,
absolutely. Bobby Hogg's a classic. Bobby Hogg played nearly 500 games for Celtic, but because of the time of year, or the era, and with the war kicking in and whatever, not a captain of Celtic, a schoolboy captain of Scotland, incredible career. His son played in the Junior Cup final. I probably shouldn't give too many spoilers away.
That's it.
But do you know the other thing that came through, without exception, how humble these guys were? They were saying, well, my dad never really spoke about that, or he never really spoke much about that. I'm thinking, well, just won the Scottish Cup, he won the Empire Exhibition Cup, but very, very humble, and that's a thread that goes all the way through. So great to hear. David Potter, David, God rest him, he did a similar piece on Alec McNair. You remember the Icicle? Yeah. Again, Alec McNair, more games and more records probably than anyone else. But could you find a Celtic fan that could have a conversation? No. But now people on the tours they know who McNair was. The Icicle nickname sticks. So part of what we're doing here is actually, it's giving these guys another wee, a minute in the sun. That sounds all wrong, but it's just raising that profile and making awareness of folk who lived the dream and were a huge part of Celtic's history over the years. So that's a good part. Yeah.
And right for them to be recognised. Yeah. Matt, you mentioned your Harry Hood book, and you've spoken there about different people that your writing has brought you into contact with. And on that note, it'd be right at this time to talk about your friendship with Tommy Callaghan.
Yeah, absolutely. Tommy, where do you start? Tommy, what a lovely man. And humble, your timing's spot on. The word humble and Tommy go hand in hand. He would play down. Sometimes I got friendly with Tommy through the Forward for Harry, as you say, and over the last few years, Tommy lives quite locally. We'd meet up maybe once a month, go for a cup of tea. Not only could Tommy play for Scotland, play for Celtic. Tommy could drink tea for Scotland, so we'd go at 1 o'clock and we finished at 4 o'clock, and he'd be sharing his stories. Just a remarkable guy. And we sort of played down. Maybe some of the fans couldn't take to me, whatever. Just sort of say, well, Tommy, Jock Dean signed you twice, and he picked you 300 times at probably our greatest era. Mm-hmm. So if anybody couldn't take to you, I guess that's their problem. So wonderful player. I remember getting away back to the early 70s. Do you remember we played Espestosa? Are you aware of it? I was going to say
rings a bell.
I forget your youth policy, but so back when I would be about 10 and 11, and there was a guy called Ferenc Benny. Some of the older listeners maybe be aware of him. He's Hungarian international. I remember him describing Tommy Callaghan as the best midfielder at Europe. Tommy, marauding left-sided midfield player. And at that time, it's 71, 72, 73 for me. I was lucky enough to see Tommy at the start and end his career, if you like. That would be him at his peak. Tremendous player, tremendous engine. And as I say, Jock signed him twice. Jock never signed anybody else twice. Mm-hmm. 300 games for Celtic, top player. But maybe perhaps even more important than that, top man. The loveliest, most generous, kindest of men. And you interviewed him last year, and Tommy would give up his time for that. He was there with his son, a couple of pals that night, thoroughly enjoyed it. And there were some lovely speakers that night. I mean, you had a great night, so there's a few stars that night. I would never disrespect any, but listening to Tommy, he had the audience, you remember that, he had the audience in the palm of his hand. He was telling the story. They had a good game that night, he would say, but not in a show-offy way, just an absolute natural. I think we're still trying to process that one. It's just a few days. Obviously, at Celtic Park last night and it's a lovely tribute to Tommy, and my goodness. And the other thing, because he's been around the club, there's so many people. I was bumping into people last night. Oh, what about Tommy? What about this? Mm-hmm. And everyone says the same thing. It's the same words. Kind, generous, humorous, funny guy. I don't know if you remember the Jota on the wing, the superstar. Yes, I've lost the girl's name that played the guitar with Jota. I was watching it the other night. Dear my, but Tommy, the superstar for County, if ever something captured the man, that few seconds of Tommy with the County spin to the 80 and the laughter in the background, I just wish we could play that in a loop. Mm-hmm. It was so a lovely man. I don't know how we're going to deal with that one. Thoughts and prayers with Cathy, Tom Marie and the family at the moment. It's a huge loss to the wider Celtic family beyond that. That's for sure. Yeah, and great to hear stories on and off here, Matt, of your friendship with Tommy. Great player, great guy, and he will certainly be sadly missed. And great to see Celtic recognise that at the game last night. Matt, we'll get back into Celtic in the 30s, and before we get into some of the individuals that you've mentioned, Jimmy McGrory, Johnny Thompson and various others, can you sum up for us, for those who weren't there at the time, what Celtic were like during that era? What would be the best way to sum up Celtic in the 30s? Yeah, I think I used the phrase a couple of times in the book. It's consistently inconsistent, and that would be it. We'd have the highest of highs, and in this case for real, the lowest of lows. So it's quite a time span to confirm to sort of cover. With it's partly why there's two books. In essence, there's sort of two eras in there. In the 30s, there's if we sort of pick up from the summer of 1929, and that's not accidental. Lots of things are changing then. Willie McStay has left and has replaced the Celtic captain by his brother Jimmy. Obviously, younger viewers will know that the great nephews of those guys also played cup final. It's a brand new Celtic Park. And people are saying, the stadium's been there forever, but 1992. But there's a brand new, the main stand that where Tommy was honoured last night. The main stand that was opened in August of 1929. First time Celtic the match programme. So and they took the opportunity because there'd been a fire in the old pavilion in the corner at Jane Field Street. So they took the opportunity really to I guess remodel the whole ground. So in all intents, it was the beginning of an era. So it starts with there. Celtic's not doing particularly well at that time. They've lost a few of their older established stars. And they're starting to build a new team with, the remnants of the 27 Cup winning team. So that would be the great McGrory, it would be John Thompson, God rest him. So there's that team that builds up over the next few years to the events of 1931 with the US. It takes Celtic go to America, which has been Maley's dream for 30, 40 years, to take Celtic to the new world. And they go as Cup winners on the back of the most incredible Scottish Cup final comeback, again inspired by the great McGrory, with 2 goals down to Motherwell with 7 minutes left, and we somehow pull that out and take the cup the States. So there's that first team, and then we have the aftermath of the tragedy of not just John Thompson, but within a few weeks of John passing away. I'm probably saying too much here, but within a few weeks of John passing away, then we have issues with another young star, Peter Scarf, an absolute standout. I guess midfielder, number 6 or 8 or maybe even a 10 in today's language. So, and Maley has to cope with that. And Maley, by this time, Celtic is already his life. So the deaths of these two, young superstars hits Celtic, it hits Maley. It takes us a while to recover for that. And then, maybe about the summer of 1934 is the other sort of line in the sand where some of the greats move on and a new young team comes in, and that's the team that readers will probably be familiar with as the Empire exhibition team. So over the next few years, where the great McMenemy comes back as a coach or de facto manager, as David Potter or Pat Woods would say. In essence, Maley by this time is 70, and the younger McMenemy is in there and maybe more in touch and understanding of the players. So he builds this second great team, which culminates in real success in the second half of the decade. And then I guess the book ends with the end of that era as Maley sort of hands the baton on, reluctantly, no doubt, to his former captain, James McStay. It's an incredible era, and all the way through you're getting these stars, these names dropping in, dropping out, and some of the lesser, I guess, known players, but with their own great backstories as well. And the other thing as well is not just about Celtic, but some of the other great sides around at that time. These are names that probably people will be familiar when they hear them again or they read them again. They'll say, "Oh, I've heard of so and so." So it's a remarkable era.
A lot going on there. Hence the 2 volumes, perhaps.
Yes.
I do want to spend a wee bit of time on the 2 figures that I dare say most, if not all, Celtic fans are very familiar with. Jimmy McGrory, the great Jimmy McGrory, and of course Johnny Thompson. I was going to ask you, generally speaking, about some of the lesser heard figures of the time, but you've beat me at the punch in terms of Peter Scarf. So I don't know Peter Scarf's story at all.
Okay.
I know you spoke recently at the Peter Scarf CSC. Where is that again?
I did. It's in Linwood. It's Peter's. That's Peter. So I spoke in the what was the church where Peter's Requiem Mass was held and where he was baptised, which I didn't know until the night. So it's in Linwood. So
could you tell us, for myself as much as anyone watching or listening, the story of Peter Scarf at Celtic?
Yeah, absolutely. It's like John Thompson, a tragic story, or perhaps not so much known. So Peter comes to Celtic sort of 1928. He's a star. He's playing local. He's playing with St Linwood's in Cornwall, and Celtic obviously alerted to him to get him signed. He's farmed out to Maryhill Hibs, Maryhill Hibernian, had become Maryhill Harp in later years. They're the Scottish Junior Cup holders, and they had a good track record with Celtic of developing players, and that would continue right up to the 60s and beyond. But anyway, so Peter plays for a junior select against Celtic reserves at Celtic Park, and he stands out. So within a couple of months of going to Maryhill, he's called up for Celtic, and he basically breaks into the first team and never leaves. But that's a tragically short career, because as I say, in modern parlance, he would be number 10 in the sort of 1 to 11 inside left, if you like. So left-sided midfielder, could play 6 or 8. Also, he could play at centre forward. The great McGrory, because of the way he played, he was forever getting hurt. Broken bones, broken this and broken that. So Peter would also be the standing centre, but he wasn't a standing centre that made up the numbers. He would go in and score a hat trick. So it's just a superb player. And the aftermath of John Thompson. So John dies, as we know, 5th of September at Ibrox. John dies. The following week, there's a famous picture of the teams coming out. Peter Scarf's not in that picture either. Nobody really picks up on that. He's not in the team. It's when you're even looking at the newspapers at the time, there's not really much been said as to why he's ill. But it turns out he has this lung condition. A few weeks after John dies, he has to leave the field at half time. Because he's shortage of breath, and this happens a few times. He's in, he's out. By Christmas of 31, so just within 3 months, he plays against Leith Athletic, who were a top flight side at that time. He plays at Celtic Park, so around about Christmas time, and he coughs up blood on the pitch at the end, and it's diagnosed then as pulmonary. It's consumption, which you may have heard if you're watching consumption. It even sounds dreadful, doesn't it? But he's diagnosed with consumption, which is, I think, pulmonary TB. It's a lung condition, potentially fatal, and sadly, in Peter's case, that's what happened. So, sort of 19th of December, he's playing for Celtic, and by, I think it's the 12th of January, he's been committed to this Bridge of Weir sanatorium again. And you look at the picture, it looks as bad as it sounds. I've done a wee bit of research into that. There's a couple of hopes of remission. Peter himself is talking to his fiancée and talking about how he can't wait to go back. And if you're reading the narrative in the newspapers, or particularly Maley's annual review, you just see how the dialogue changes from we're looking forward to him being back to struggling, he might not be back, to my goodness, he's fighting for his life. If you read through the words now that you know what's happened, you can tell that Maley knew in the third of this sort of, you can tell that Maley knew, because he's talking about how he hopes he can fight it with, the courage of those of our faith. The whole language changes. So as I say, he's playing for Celtic in December 1931, and by December 1933 he's dead. He's only 24. He's played his last game for Celtic, same as John Thompson did. He's played his last game for Celtic at the age of 22. These are two of the core men from the 31 Cup winning team, and by within a few months they're gone from the field, and in 2 years they're both gone. And that cup, they weren't the only. There was a third member of that cup winning team from nearby Johnson, Bertie Thompson, who you may have heard. There were three Thompsons. The three Thompsons, all with the same spelling, in the team at the same time, in the cup winning team, and none of them were related. Bertie was from Johnson, and Bertie, another tragic story. Bertie in 1937. Bertie dies on his daughter's third birthday, aged 29. It's just so. You might remember the Motherwell Cup winning team in 1991.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
There was a whole. When you look back, there was a whole lot of heartache and tragedy. So very much the case of the folk who went to America in 1931. There was 5 of them dead within 5 years. It's quite horrendous.
Yeah.
And Maley took all of that. One of them was his brother, Tom Maley. Maley took all of that on board. Maley was Celtic.
Tom Maley playing the first team as well with.
He did.
Yeah.
Tom Maley played in the very first game. Tom Maley scored Celtic's first ever hat-trick in the 5-2 game. And he appeared, it's a story in itself now, but he appeared, he didn't travel out with Celtic in 1931, but he appeared very quickly afterwards. And there's different versions of why that would be. But there's a photo of the Celtic, I think it's taken in Detroit, June 31 in the Motor City. There's a picture of the Celtic players. They're wearing civvies, and it's quite an iconic photo. And 3 or 4 the men who died, they're all sort of standing in a wee clump together. It's just like so. At a moment in time, McGrory's standing at the front of the Scottish Cup, and all these men, friends, colleagues who'd not be long for this world, they're all huddled round about him. So it's you can tell when I'm talking, it's an incredibly poignant period in time, successful and also unsuccessful, but there was always something happening. There was always a story to be told.
In terms of the Peter Scarf CSC in Linwood then that you mentioned and that you visited recently, how did they come to be? Was it just folks of the area at that time, or is it in more recent times? Can you tell us just a wee bit about how they adopted Peter Scarf's name? Yeah,
it goes all the way back. I guess I'll answer the last part first. It goes all the way back. I think it's 1947. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure it's 1947. So Peter died in 1933, and they renamed, I believe, the supporters club as it was at that time, or sort of came together, a number of wee clubs, and the Peter Scarf Club has been running since the late 1940s on them. You see their banner from time to time, and they now have their own premises. As you say, I did a wee presentations. First time I've really done anything like that. And I hadn't told them much about what I was doing. I just said, what it was is Martin O'Neill. They had Martin O'Neill as the guest. As you know, Martin does he's on the circuit. And I'd got in touch with him to say, look, I'm writing a story. Would you be keen? I could do something, in the interval, and that's what I did. I just pulled together a bit of a slide presentation to music. And I knew that, obviously, I'd spoken to Peter's uncle. Paulie Tim actually put me in touch with Peter's uncle. I had a wee chat with him. Willie's in his 80s now, probably not thank me for telling him that. But anyway, so he gave me some input to the book, and he was there that night. But I never told anyone what I was doing. I just said to the chap who was organising it, just how long have I got? I could 15, 20 minutes, that's fine. Pull together the story of Peter's life. So not just his football career, but managed to research about his family, where he'd come from, and everything else, which allowed me to tie that in for Willie. So Willie's dad got a mention, if you like, and then I carried that story out, and it seemed to go down really. I haven't done it anywhere else yet, but it seemed to go down really, really well. And it was only when I was sitting waiting to go in that the chap said to me, "Do you realise this is where Peter's Requiem Mass was here? So see where you're sitting. That's where Maley would have been sitting watching that service." I don't know about you, but I was like, okay. and I managed to, so I put that into the presentation. So
Nothing like a bit of that for pre-match nerves.
well, I was going to, I totally left field. I thought I should probably have got that. I couldn't actually find the church because obviously it's a social club and they built a new bigger one and everything. But that's so Peter's life began and ended in the hall, where I was given a presentation to a group of people in a club who is named after him, including some of his family. So it doesn't get more personal than that. But I mean, I loved it, and it went down really well. And I thought, I'm going to do some more of this. I like this.
That's sounds like a lot of pride in doing so as well, Matt. And I followed it on Twitter at the time, and it seemed to be really well received. And I suppose Peter's story, as much as the various others that you catch within the book, it's indicative of what the book's about, isn't it? It's bringing stories to life. The lesser heard, dare I say. These stories get lost over time,
yes.
And it's through the work of yourself and the other great Celtic authors out there that bring these stories back to life. And as I say, I think that's what it's all about. I suppose a guy that doesn't need any introduction into Celtic folklore is Jimmy McGrory. I see Jimmy McGrory as one of the original Celtic heroes, and I think if you grow up in a Celtic family or a Celtic house, it's not long before you're hearing about Jimmy McGrory and his exploits. Tell us a bit about Jimmy McGrory. I mean, in terms of the headlines, so he joined Celtic in 1922 from the Rock, from St Roch's, where he won the Scottish Cup in 22.
Yep.
He's at Celtic for 15 years as a player till 1937. Yep. He goes on to be the manager for 20 years between 45 and 65. He's just a hero to many, and obviously St Roch's renamed their park Jimmy McGrory Park, I think in 2013. He's the absolute hero of the Garden Gad, the hero in that part of the world.
Yes.
Did you need to do a lot of digging into Jimmy McGrory's own story, and did you find anything that we don't know or that's maybe lesser told?
Yeah, I think there's a few things came up. I had done a bit of research in the background of Jimmy anyway, and I guess I probably knew. I was lucky enough to meet Jimmy McGrory. Yeah, absolutely. So we'd probably be 75 maybe. And Jimmy brought up about with Jerry McNee. Before Jerry McNee was famous as being Jerry McNee, he was he co-wrote he wrote Jimmy's autobiography with him, Lifetime in Paradise.
I've got it, and it's hanging together by sellotape and all sorts of stuff. But
excellent.
My girlfriend's dad passed it on. It's great.
It's a cracker. So I'm lucky enough to have it. I have to say, mine is definitely better in condition than yours. Think shame on yourself.
Yeah.
But so I'd be a wee boy. So again, some of the older listeners might remember the Supporters Association hut in Kinloch Street. So over towards the visiting section at Celtic Park now, no longer there. So that's where people used to congregate before the game. Probably the first Celtic shop was in there, although it was probably a display cabinet, and you could buy a few things. You get a Bovril in there. Anyway, Jimmy McGrory did his book launch, or one of his book launches in the Supporters Association hut, Kinloch Street. My dad took me along, and Jimmy signed his copy of the book, which I've still got from him. He said hello. He's an older man by then, obviously an absolute gentleman. So Jimmy McGrory's been a big part, I guess, of our story. He was born and brought up in the Garden Gad. What people might not know about him is that he lost his father very, very young, a total freak accident. Jimmy's dad was I think hit by a stone. So Jimmy became vital as a breadwinner in the family as well. So like lots of players of that area, lots of heartache. Alec McNair was very similar. Lots of heartache in their life. But I guess on the park, McGrory was outstanding. I usually tell a bad joke on the tours when I'm standing doing my introduction, because on the tours I do my spiel through people. People allow you to very quickly go through Celtic's history, with Brother Walford and Maley, McGrory, the Steen, all the way through. I talk about Jimmy. This time you've got your audience together. I'll say Jimmy McGrory was just the same height as me. So, avoid the Jimmy Cranky 5'0" jokes or whatever. But it was built properly, and Jimmy McGrory was the same height as me. So we went to the same school.
What is that height?
I'm not telling you. What height would you like it to be? So Jimmy McGrory's only the same height to me. He's only the same height as me. He went to the same school, born in the Garden Gad. I'm born in Springburn, but we went to the same school, St Roch's and Garden Gad. We played for the same St Boys Guild team, which I did, sort of Charles Street and then latterly up in Glencorner. Mm-hmm. And I usually say, well, Jimmy just sort of pipped me in the goal scoring stakes by about 545 goals. So sadly, I don't have my son's scoring prowess. I'm more Danny McGrain than Jimmy McGrory. But anyway, McGrory was just an incredible talent. As you say, St Roch's in their very, very first year won the Junior Cup. Still to this day, the only time they won the Junior Cup. He then follows that what would become a well-worn path to Celtic Park. He's loaned out to Clydebank to gain experience. What does McGrory do? He comes back as a Clydebank player and scores a winning goal at Celtic Park. So very quickly I think, well, maybe we should have this guy playing for us and against us. And then for the next 14 years he averages over a goal a game. People are arguing about the figures with charity cups and whatever, but for me, 550 goals, 546 games, 56 hat-tricks, 8 goals in the one game. Just the most incredible guy. And he scored big goals. He scored in cup finals. He scored Scotland at Wembley. So McGrory was a hero. We always have you have that chat. You'll have it as well with your pals. So you talk about who should the statues be at Celtic Park. Very, very subjective. But 2 statues for me at Celtic Park. If I'm given a blank cheque and a sculptor, a chisel. Yeah. For me, it's there's a few guys, but in that group, the great McGrory with that iconic, was it the human torpedo, the diving header to break the world scoring record, December 1935 against Aberdeen. It's a moment in time, isn't it? He's almost horizontal in a frozen park, and he still manages. I think it's like Murphy's Cross, believe it or not, and he puts that in for the record. So Jimmy McGrory and John Thompson, because McGrory, when he was talking about John. In the book, he talks about John being the greatest goalkeeper he ever seen. So folks sometimes forget, so who's the greatest goalkeeper? I say, well, this guy had X amount of games or so many trophies, but John was only there for a few years. McGrory said he was the greatest goalkeeper he ever seen. That will sort of do for me. Yeah. So McGrory and Thompson, there are cover images, and that's not accidental for me. There's obviously, I was going to say the next in line, the heirs apparent, they're also in there in the inside flaps and the back covers or whatever. The other, like Peter Scarf, God rest him. So McGrory for me up there with the greatest ever Celtic, probably maybe second only to Maley in terms of service. If you mentioned that 20 years also as a PR man. Yep. When Jock Stein came in, he became the liaison, liaison officer, liaison manager for Celtic. He dealt with all that. So half a century of service and more probably for Jimmy as well. So yeah, absolutely. Celtic great.
When you talk about Jimmy McGrory, almost instantly that image you mentioned comes into my head. I read a book, I'd be amazed if you've not read it, Matt. It's Heroes Are Forever by John Kearney.
Yes.
And it's the more up to date, I suppose. It's maybe about 10 years old now.
It's a great book.
An amazing book about Jimmy McGrory by John Kearney, who I think himself passed away recently.
He did.
The front cover's a really kind of striking image of Jim McGrory, but when you go into the inside, that he is horizontal to the deck in this diving header, and it's what I think of when I think of Jimmy McGrory.
Brilliant.
I'll tell a very quick story. You mentioned that you'd met him and you were lucky enough to do so. I've spoke to you before about the fact that my dad grew up on Delburn Street, which at the time sat just off Janefield Street near the Iron Brew factory or the Bars factory.
Yes.
It's no longer here now, but I've been in touch a few times with Peter Marshall, who I think is fairly friendly with you.
Yes.
Peter lived on Malcolm Street, which sat in that area. Long story short, all these kids growing up in the 50s off the back of Celtic Park, and basically what is deemed the away end at Celtic Park was where they played football, and there was kind of goals chalked up on the back wall and stuff. And my dad was playing football there at some point with my Uncle James and various others, and not possible nowadays in modern Celtic Park, but they booted the ball over the wall. So what do? The ball's over the wall, the ball's in Celtic Park. My dad gets sent round to the front doors, and it's the old front doors, with the stained glass and all that stuff. My dad gets sent round to Celtic Park. Right, go and get the ball. So my dad toddles round, and it's just unthinkable now. Chaps the front door. Who opens the door? Jimmy McGrory.
No way.
Opens the front door. It's almost like you've got his house. He's like, how's it going? Hey, master, I've kicked the ball. Come on in.
Can we get our ball back?
Jimmy McGrory gets him in, sends my dad scampering across the park to pick up the ball, a wee word in his ear and all that kind of stuff. And just a great moment. But my dad's told us that story at different times over the years. But as I say, we are not the only Celtic house where you just hear these stories in different ways about Jimmy McGrory. And as I say, for many, he's the original Celtic hero. And you cannot, as you know, write a book about Celtic in the 30s without a lot of Jimmy McGrory content. And rightfully so. He's a genuine hero, isn't he?
I love that. Absolutely hero. I love that story. And of course, you'll know that where you were brought up, that's the site of the original, or where your dad was brought up, is the site of the original Celtic Park. So
41 Delburn Street.
My goodness me. And do you know who else lived there? Will Quinn, the trainer, who was also...
And I know you've done a piece on him in the Celtic Star.
Yes.
Well, Matt, there's obviously a few things we're covering. You mentioned the wee video of Tommy Callaghan earlier on, the superstar from Cowdenbeath. You've mentioned the story about Celtic's trainer there. We'll include the links to these in the show notes so that people who are watching or listening can get a feel for some of the things we're talking about. So amazing stuff from Jim McGrory, and still remembered very fondly to this day. Johnny Thompson, you've mentioned, of course, and again, same applies. You can't talk about Celtic in the 30s without talking about Johnny Thompson. Yes. He joined as a very young man in 1926, I believe. Yep. Before his untimely passing in September 1931. Described by many as the Prince of Goalkeepers. Just, again, so widely talked about in Celtic for so many years. But we're now nearly 100 years, Matt, since he passed. In 5 years, where are we? 7 years' time, about 100 years since Johnny Thompson passed. Why do you think he's still so well remembered and so well revered in the Celtic world?
Well, I mean, it's hard to escape that the answer to that is tied in hugely, I guess, with the circumstances of his death. How it happened, where it happened. I mean, I don't think there's an equivalent anywhere. Sadly, there's been a few players who have died on a playing field. I think, from memory, I did some research on that at the time. I think maybe John was the third or fourth at that time. Sadly, there's been more in recent, but it's a romantic figure in many ways. So there's two elements to this. If you were around at the time, you would recognise John Thompson as probably the greatest goalkeeper ever, maybe the greatest goalkeeper in the world, and still only a young man. If you even think of Casper and Big Joe Hart or whatever, goalkeeper tends to be a senior player, an older player in the team, not the oldest player, Craig Gordon. Whereas John was, I think you're right. John was signed from Wellesley in Fife. He was in the first team at 18 at Celtic. He was capped for Scotland as a goalkeeper at 21, quite unheard of at that time. His career was also very, I guess, not as brief as Peter Scarf's, God rest him, but still in a football career's time. 1926, he's at Celtic Park, and by 1931, he's gone. It's a heartbeat. So I think there's a romantic tragic element of John that I think that's kept it going. The fact that this young man in his absolute prime, with the whole world in front of him, including he's got a fiance, he's looking forward to, popular, handsome, absolutely. John's got everything going for him, and all of a sudden, in a blink of an eye, that's gone. And there's also a backstory, because obviously the John Thompson story itself has been fairly well documented. Some tremendous books out there as well, which we used in the research, but maybe not the circumstances leading up to his death. There's a few, again, no spoilers, but there's a few sliding door moments in terms of what might have happened beforehand. All of which, if any one of these had went a slightly different direction, that just doesn't happen, including the player being on the park who was involved. I've also taken the opportunity to look at that incident from a number of different angles. So there's the angle from John and the widely known one. That's well documented. But I've also looked at it from the point of view of Sam English, to the extent where Pat Woods was kind enough to loan me Sam English's biography. Mm-hmm. So just to get his view and it's quite incredible. And as I say, there's a whole lot of things that had to happen for that incident to take place that day. Some of which were only decided in the minutes before the game on newspaper. As I say, I'm walking that fine line here, but not trying to waste it for people. But there's things that were happening right up to 5-3 that would actually be catastrophic in the lives of two men, not just one. Mm-hmm. So as I say, we've tried to look at it compassionately, obviously, but also from different perspectives, not just from the traditional Celtic rhetoric, but what else was going on there. And it's an incredible story, and also spent quite a bit of time on the aftermath. So not just the immediate aftermath, the funeral, which in itself was an incredible occasion in Scottish society. Thousands walking to Fife, and they still do 90 years later.
Yeah, I think Celtic Graves partnered up with the Johnny Thompson Memorial Committee and reenacted that walk, 55 miles, I think, from Glasgow to Cardendale in Fife. 30,000 people attending his funeral at Bow Hill Cemetery. I remember as well, I've mentioned my dad, he took me when I was young to see Johnny Thompson's grave as a young man and stuff, and I don't know why you get kind of caught up in that. I remember I was young, but it's still important, I think, to tell those stories and hear about guys like Johnny Thompson at such a young age. Yep. And I think you rightly mention Sam English, because I think his life was never the same afterwards. He was completely exonerated of any blame by the family of Johnny Thompson, amongst many others. And he only spent a couple of years at Rangers, but I think he ended up retiring at 28, something like that, and it just haunted him forever, as it would. A complete accident, a complete tragedy. But maybe it was just an indication, Matt, of football at the time. I read a story about Johnny Thompson maybe the season prior, cracking ribs and breaking all sorts of bones. You mentioned Jimmy McGrory breaking all sorts of bones. It was a different sport to a huge extent at that day, and you know, the tragedy was Johnny Thompson's story, but it wasn't uncommon for young footballers to get hurt at that time. No,
you're absolutely right. With the Sunderland goalkeeper as well, who was killed. In fact, Celtic played Sunderland a number of times that decade because they had matches between the National Cup winners and the National League winners in the same year. Celtic and Sunderland had won both the two, and the connection, another connection for those two sides was that they both lost their goalkeeper, the young goalkeeper, in a match. I think the Sunderland was Jimmy McGrory. It was against Chelsea, you know. And you're right, John Thompson against Airdrie, was it February the year before or February that year? But anyway, he broke his jaw and everything else. So John was fearless or reckless, I guess, depending on what you want to look at it. But it was a contact sport. But these were, you know, the goalkeeper basically was a free hit. To get the ball and get rid. When you watch the old videos, the old Patty News thing, you'll see the goalkeeper grabbing the ball and sprinting away to get rid of it, because if he didn't, bang, there was goals given by, you know, a centre forward basically taking man and ball and putting them in a net, and that was legal at that time. Actually, after it was that decade, and after some of the, I guess, the tragedies, that rule was pulled away, and it was you could no longer go and hammer the goalkeeper in the same way. That wasn't taken away altogether, but they put one or two rules in where previously there had been nothing. So you'll see that you know, that to all intents and purposes, that was a complete accident. But a very, very physical game, a real, I guess, man's game, for want of a better phrase. And sadly that led to casualties. That led to players' careers ending. And in one of isolated cases, such as John's, God rest him, it led to the loss of his life. So, yeah, horrendous.
Yeah, just some real tough stuff at that time, but really poignant recollections, I'm sure, on Johnny Thompson. The quote on his grave that a lot of you folk will know of, on his gravestone: "They never die who live in the hearts they leave behind." And it's often quoted, when speaking of Johnny Thompson. Actually, Matt, in your work as a tour guide at Celtic Park, many folks will know that that's something you also do. Johnny Thompson's yellow jersey used to sit for a long time in one of the glass cabinets at the back of the boardroom. Is that still around? Is that still there?
It is indeed. I mean, they change the displays from time to time. It's certainly, I was in shift last week. John's jersey was in there with some of the other classic jerseys for the time. So it's the jersey always there, always prominent in the boardroom as the glass, your mirrored photograph of John wearing the goalkeeper's jersey with the Scotland badge on it. So yeah, it's.
The Prince of Goalkeepers. So some great stories there amongst tragedy.
John appears in every. I would probably speak for all of the tour guides that John Thompson is a fundamental part of our story, our history. We refer to it as if Lisbon's a peak and the happiest day, then John's is the saddest day. So yeah,
and right to remember
triumph and tragedy.
And as we say, nearly 100 years on, and triumph from tragedy, Matt, is something you cover in terms of Celtic as a whole, isn't it? You know, what are we now? 140 odd years of Celtic,
137,
nearly our birthday, and we'll touch on that just shortly. But that has been Celtic since day dot, since November 1887.
Yes,
triumph from tragedy. And does the 30s epitomise that in a condensed era as such?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a strange one to try. The answer is yes, but why? Why maybe not is obviously clear. I think a lot of there was a lot going on. There was a lot going on in the context of society then, sort of touched on it right at the start in terms of depression. On the back of that horrific First World War, as it would be, or the Great War, it was termed there, which is probably the worst name ever. But people were still really recovering from, that global conflict. And little did they know, little did they know they were heading towards another one. I would maybe say hurtling, but it was actually more a gentle slide. One of the things that you find when you're going through, I'm going through newspaper reports every day, not just looking at the Celtic things. You start at the football because you pick up so much there, but also looking at what was going on in the context of the world. It's incredible stuff, and you can actually see how people are moving, as I say, to desperately trying to avoid the second conflict, and by doing so, probably allowing certain folk more leverage to do things, because the last thing we want is this again. And in actual fact, that's the last thing is exactly what they got. But it wasn't like they hurtled towards this. It was like there'd be concessions being made gradually, and then all of a sudden you have a situation where actually there's no going back here. So lots going on, contextually in the background, over and above the football. So it's an incredible. I think Patsy said to me, something of the most remarkable decade in Celtic's history, because you've got all these wonderful characters. You've got Maley, I guess, in the final decade of his half-century careers. All these ingredients: Thompson, McGrory, so many others. It's a big melting pot of Celtic theatre, and for me, it's crying out to be told. So I feel quite privileged that I'm maybe the first to come up with it, a fairly definitive record of that. So, but then it's close to my heart. There's a personal aspect going round to the families of the players, but also then to my older cousin, got an older cousin who contacted me to say, were you aware of our granddad and the John Thompson connection? No, I wasn't at all. So he then told me a story about what my granddad and his dad, my uncle, were doing, and what, again, I don't want to spoil it, but basically their reaction to the news that John was in trouble and what happened beyond that. And it just painted such a poignant image that I could then picture my granddad and my uncle, in the city centre and effectively praying for John's survival that night. And they weren't alone. So I'd never heard that before. So,
and I think the history books and the archives can tell you so much. They can tell you dates and births and deaths and scorelines and signings and all that kind of stuff. They can't tell you the human stories, and yes. I think that's where you come into play, Matt. And it sounds like you've put a huge effort and energy into bringing these various stories to life. I just as we kind of head towards the end of the piece, I was just going to ask. You've mentioned earlier that era just fascinates you. And when you put pen to paper on a Celtic book, you can write about anything and everything.
Yes.
Cup successes, individuals, managers, eras, you name it. What is it exactly that drew you most to writing about that era in the 30s?
Well, I think if we're talking about characters and events, I guess it always comes down to characters and events. We've talked at length about the main guys. If this was a film, your leading stars would be John Thompson, Jimmy McGrory, but a whole supporting cast with Maley and all these other wonderful players. The context of the world at that time, this is a Celtic team that my dad, as a wee boy, would have grew up watching. My dad would have been, at the start of this book, my dad would have been, sort of getting towards school age, and by the end of the book, he's a Celtic man. So we talk about who. If I was to say to you, who's your first team, you'll immediately think of the heroes, wouldn't you? So my dad's first team would have been these guys. Would have been my dad's first hero. Would have been Johnny. Guys like you talk about guys like Johnny Crumb. I don't know why it was Johnny. I always thought my dad was from Postle Park. I always thought so was Johnny. But when you do the research, no, Johnny wasn't. Johnny was actually born in the West End. But guys like Joe Carruth, who became Jimmy McGrory's successor, it's always there's a wonderful thing when in the autumn of 37, Jimmy by this time is 33. He's been hammered for decades and whatever. He's showing signs of wear and tear. Jimmy then is offered a chance to go into management, and it's almost like, but there's no great big announcement in the papers like that would be a major story. This is the this is the greatest striker to walk those islands, maybe the greatest striker on the planet. And it's almost like he played 1 week, wasn't a team the next week, no fanfare. Guy called Joe Carruth, who's Springburn. My dad's a wee boy. My dad would take us to Carruth's Grotty, for want of a better phrase, the Holy Shop in Castle Street in Townhead. Joe Carruth came in, and I think in 2 successive weeks he scored 2 hat tricks. So everybody's talking about this new guy Carruth. I think Joe came for Petershill, but Jimmy just thought. Then the next thing is, I understand there's a newspaper, a couple of paragraphs. I understand Jimmy McGrory's going to be announced as the manager of Kilmarnock. That's how the great McGrory, after 14 years of world-breaking records, sort of took his leave of the hoops. I thought, at that time, no one would know he'd be back at 1945. At that time, that was Jimmy. And there's Jimmy's Celtic theatre is just wonderful stuff, isn't it? If I was writing some of this stuff as fiction, it would be laughed off. I find myself saying that more and more, but only because it's true. So Jimmy becomes the manager of Kilmarnock. Guess who his first game is? Celtic at Celtic Park on Christmas Day, and Celtic absolutely destroy them. And apparently, which I think I don't like, apparently Willie Maley seemed to take maybe a bit too much pleasure from that humiliation. But he who laughs last, etc. That was Christmas Day, and Celtic hammered Kilmarnock. In March of the following year, Kelly come back to Celtic in the quarter-final of the Scottish Cup, which is still probably more prestigious than the league. Scottish Cup right up to fairly modern times would be the Scottish Cup final was it, 130,000 or whatever at Hampden. So of course Jimmy comes back 3 months after this humiliation at Celtic Park and knocks Celtic out in his way to taking Kilmarnock to the cup final in his first year. So Jimmy had something, didn't he? He had magic. So, and he was probably too much a gentleman to
That's
to
all.
throw that back.
That's always the line, wasn't it? He was too nice a guy in terms of the
Held on,
management stuff.
apparently
But
so.
what a Celtic hero and what a legacy he leaves behind.
Yes.
Matt, it's one of a number of fascinating stories in the book, and I'm looking forward to reading it in full. I've got some excerpts, but I'm looking forward to reading the full book. On that, can you give us some details? So, in terms of the date, when it's released, and where folks can get a copy?
Yeah, absolutely. So the books will be here with us next Tuesday, day of Leipzig game, and the first copies will be getting posted out on the 6th of November, which, not coincidentally, just happens to be quite a special day in our calendar. So I think that's our 137th birthday.
I'll take your maths for it. So 137 years old. So the book's available on Tuesday coming, 5th of November, and you'll be sending out early copies on the 6th. And where can folks go? Can they go online as well as to the Celtic stores? Yeah,
so absolutely. So pre-orders have been taken now. We've actually done really well. Pre-orders have been taken out at Celtic Star Shops /com. It'll be in the Celtics stores and official outlets. We'll put it in Amazon. So they'll be the main outlets. They'll be the main outlets initially anyway.
Okay. And as always, I'd mentioned a few things we'll link to. We'll absolutely link to where everyone can buy their copy of the book. Matt, as always, it's whether it's the 30s, the 80s, the modern day, whatever it is, anytime talking Celtic with you is always good fun. It's always, something I really look forward to. So I just want to get your final thoughts on this latest instalment in your own Celtic writing career.
Well, I have to say it's been labour of love. It's a bit overused. I believe this is my finest work. I've put heart and soul into it for everything, and it's because it's something that Pat Woods always said to me: if you're not enjoying doing something, stop doing it.
This is Pat Woods.
A fabulous author and historian. He's been great. Matt, have you considered that angle? Have a look at this book, see what you think of that. So it's, as I say, I've given it everything. Early feedback from some of the people who've asked to do reviews has been really positive. The books look great, which is always a help. Can't take any credit for that. But I'm looking forward to the action. As I say, this is probably it. This is probably the pinnacle. I'm not sure there's another story like that.
Are you hanging up your fountain pen? Is this what you're telling us?
Let's just see where we go.
TBC. Yeah. Matt, as I say, a genuine pleasure. Best of luck with the book as always, and great to have you here on the show.
Thanks a million, Tino. Thoroughly enjoyed it.